Hi guys, it's Sophie. So today I'm going to be doing a review of My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book has been making the rounds on all of the bookish internets, so I'm sure there's other reviews out there already, but you guys know that this year for any review book I receive that I like, I'm doing a full length review on it. So this is my review of My Dark Vanessa. The very first thing I need to say about this book before I start talking about the book itself is that I read another book before I read this book that I didn't love, but that has influenced my reading of this book an awful lot, and that's Excavation, a Memoir by Wendy C. Ortez. Now, this book's plot follows very closely the memoir of this girl's life. So reading those two books, whilst I didn't love Excavation, I found it really hard to read, it did impact and improved my enjoyment, I think, of this book that I'm reading that's a fictionalised story. So what is this book about? Why is it got so much buzz? This is a story about a girl who goes away to a school that she's kind of begged her parents to let her go to. She thinks it's going to be like this academic kind of dream, independent. She's going to get the time to learn and kind of live a little bit of the college life ahead of going to university. And she meets a teacher who is her English teacher, who has untoward advances to her through this book. That's not a spoiler, because the whole point of this book is that we are going between her story when she's sort of 13, 14, and when she's living her adult life, dealing with the aftermath of what's happened to her when she was young. One of the things that's so interesting about this book, and why it links to the memoir that I read, is at the time that this is happening, our main character Vanessa doesn't think that what's happening is wrong. She thinks she's living in a complete and total love story. She thinks that this person really adores her, and part of her kind of development as a character, when we see that going back to when she's older, is that she has learnt this story, that this has become a part of her truth, a part of her reality, is that when she was a child she was in love and adored by this older man, and that society thought that this was wrong and that she didn't necessarily agree. So we have two main elements of this story. We see this abuse and this grooming unfold over sort of years, really years of this girl's life, but we also see her unwinding the grooming at a later age. And I think that's what makes this book so interesting, is that we get the character going through these things, but then the aftermath. And I think that's what makes this different to other books that deal with similar subject matters, is that there can be a sensationalist edge to stories, fictional or non-fiction, of abuse of girls, of young girls. It's something that can be quite flashy and interesting and compelling, and this book was really compelling. But the thing that makes this more sophisticated is that we see it unwoven at a later date, and see how hard work that is, and we see the impact of this this grooming, this part of her life, and how it's fed into pretty much every other part of who she is. And I think that's why I enjoyed this book so much. The reason why I'm talking about Excavation in conjunction to this is Excavation is a book told similarly. So it's non-fiction, it's a memoir about a girl who thought she'd fallen in love with her English teacher, and in the memoir she goes through in a similar way and reflecting back on what has happened. She also thinks that she's in love, she also thinks that nothing bad has happened, but the same as in My Dark Vanessa, there are these glimpses where you see this little girl so clearly not okay with what's going on, but with no reference to say that this isn't okay. I have to say, I did really feel for Vanessa in this story. I felt that she didn't know her own isolation and her own risk, I suppose, in this scenario. I think she goes into this school very confident and very sure that she can do this life. Almost, it feels a little bit like she's almost wanting to skip a stage and live a more grown-up life, and that puts her so much at risk of someone who's going to come into her life and say, you're different to everyone else, you're so much more mature, and you've old soul, all of those kind of things that play into her idea of herself. And that's not to blame her for what happens, but I think that sets up why she's at such a risk. I did feel quite frustrated with the parents in this story. They do try and take action to remove her from this person, but it really is like too little too late, and there's a willful closing of eyes to what's happening because it's too horrible to think about, and lots of things play into her story that make her feel like she's living this great love story and people are trying to prevent it, and that in a way can be quite romantic, the kind of forbidden love. But we then, the thing that's so clever is we then see, you know, her still talking to this man when she's older, when she's past this, and who she sees him as then, and the link she has with him then, and her trying to tell what she feels as her story at that point, and that being so complicated because she doesn't feel like, for a lot of this story, like she's a victim. She feels like she is someone who is beloved, which again is why I enjoyed this, because I think this is a very true story, that people can feel that they haven't been hurt, whereas other people might view that as them having been hurt, and that can be a really hard journey. As I say, the thing that I found really interesting about this is how it changes her perception of herself, her history, and who she is as a person, because these fundamental building blocks of who she is have been made with this man, and her perception of who she is in relation to men has been made with this man. I think as a society we're having lots of conversations at the moment about power and influence and how those interact with sexual experiences. The other book that I read just before I read My Dark Vanessa, which again played into my reading of this, so I ended up reading a lot of other stuff around it, which gave me more to think about when I was going through this, which was, oh my goodness, I can't remember what it's called. It's called Unwanted Advances. I hated that book, don't buy it, but that is a non-fiction book talking about what the author believes to be an overbearing culture of kind of protectionism against students in academic institutions. So I don't like the book, I wouldn't recommend reading it even as an accompanying read, but basically the premise is she thinks that there's a freedom to adults being able to have relationships with whoever they choose, regardless of the power dynamics. And I think this is not that, like this is different. This girl is definitely still a child when this relationship is going on. But again, reading that book where the people were kind of 18, so they're kind of just turning the corner into adulthood, and she was kind of defending their ability to have relationships with people much older than them. That played into my reading of this book too, because I didn't agree with what she was saying, and I could see how this is the result of that viewpoint, which I found really interesting. Yeah, so this one is coming out in January of 2020, so it's a little bit of a wait away, and I'm sure you guys, you know, if you're interested, put it on like pre-order, that always really helps. But yeah, if you're interested in that particular kind of story or that particular kind of discussion, I think that My Dark Vanessa is something you'll enjoy. There's obviously a whole realm of trigger warnings in relation to grooming, sexual abuse, sexual assault and rape of people who are minors in this book. That goes slightly without saying, but I also think it's always good just to mention that. So it depends in what place you are as to how well you might feel to read this book. So yeah, let me know what you think. Do you think you're going to pick this one up when it does eventually come out, or is it one you want to give a miss? Yeah, I know it's a little while away, so apologies for the review in advance of the release date, but I did want to chat about it, and I like chatting about books I've read close to when I've read them, so I feel like I still am close to the reading experience and can give that like a genuine reflection to you guys when I talk about it on film. Yes, so I'll see you guys in another video again soon, and look after yourselves until then. Bye bye.